Thank you for joining us. I'm Frank Musica, and I will be guiding you through the webinar. We will be covering two project-related exposure types that have been a problem in the past and will create perils for firms in the coming years. First, we will look at sustainability exposures. From our first seminars on green design about 15 years ago until now, we have seen the types of exposures faced by firms evolve, and we will talk about that evolution and ways to deal with the risks firms now face. And we will examine the continuing risks faced by firms designing condos. After a hiatus in building condos during the Great Recession, we are now seeing projects being rushed to the market. And with that increased activity, we will be seeing increased claims. For both of these topics, we will not get into much detail. So I urge all policyholders to access our www.ushered.com school risk management website to download more substantive information about these topics. Here's a common definition of sustainability. It is what guided green design and led to the huge growth in the demand for a change in the emphasis in buildings. It has caused a significant evolution in the standard of care for design professionals as well. And as I have said, we have tracked claims that have had some nexus to green design or sustainability over the years. What we have seen is that we are now in the third wave of claims related to designing for sustainability. This is what we saw first. To a great extent, design firms, especially architecture firms, created their own problems. They often promised more than they could deliver. In part, this was because of their enthusiasm, but also because of the marketing hype, including unrealistic expectations created by certification programs such as LEED. So there were situations where firms told their clients that they could design a project that, for instance, used 50% less energy, or that USGBC's Green Building Certification Institute would accredit a submitted project as meeting the gold standard, or that by meeting LEED point totals, the building would provide a more healthful and productive work environment. And then when a building used only slightly less energy, or wasn't given the required certification, or the client or a tenant had a documented increase in sick days, the design firm was sued for not living up to its promises. And of course, some clients, developers, simply added a failure to meet green design requirements to other alleged deficiencies when they sued the architect. Then we went from claims that mentioned unmet expectations and detrimental reliance to claims that were more focused on the performance gaps. Sometimes they were just contractual commitments that were or could not be met by design. There were situations where design firms saw a promising new product or system and specified it without sharing with the project owner possible downsides to the untested component. Delays in the contractor's ability to finish a project because of a specified product, material, or system that was not readily available led to major delays. And missed certification standards led to a reduction in the value of a project, a reduction that a developer might try to recoup by suing the design team, or incentives such as speedier approvals or energy or water reduction credits weren't attained, and they all led to claims. And now the claims we see have evolved to the point where they are difficult to identify as really being related to sustainable design. It has been somewhat of a subtle shift, and we are seeing misrepresentation claims, deceptive practice allegations, and even greenwashing or fraud causes of action. For the most part, legal responsibilities that are not covered by professional liability insurance. This even extends to disputes over undisclosed life cycle costs, over the incorporation of materials or products that contain substances that might cause environmental or health problems. That's the materials transparency issue, or other performance deficiencies. And of course, there are still false promises by firms, but for the most part, firms that forgot normal risk management techniques in the early enthusiasm for green design now understand the necessity of prudent management of projects. There are general principles that we think you should remember on all projects, but especially when you are providing services to a client who seems to have a strong interest in green or high performance projects. The first is to avoid ambiguous or onerous contractual provisions that are often based on misunderstandings by clients. Contracts for services should be a meeting of the minds about the project. Any green design project should be approached with greater communication. It is also important that practice management procedures acknowledge the increased interest of the client. The contract has to be a guide to the management of the project design and construction. So provisions that acknowledge what is planned as both services and deliverables, and that recognize that the design firm does not have control over energy costs or certification processes, are important. And we've always preached informed consent with sustainability or other issues as a way to make sure clients who make the final project decisions based on a design firm's recommendations understand that the risks that are involved in the project and accept the unknowns when, for example, a new product or a new technology is used. So you have to really use tailored contract language and related procedures, including informed consent in your contracts. And most importantly, while consideration of the environmental impact of design have become part of the standard of care, the efforts to create a project with more sensitivity to sustainability should be acknowledged in the fee. Do not give away your services. Do not let the client ignore the value you are creating for the client. And certainly recognize where there might be an increased risk to your firm and price your services accordingly. Most services by design firms on projects where the owner wants environmentally sensitive design or third-party certification should be included as supplemental services and not as part of basic services. We will be talking about the new AI sustainability exhibit, and you will see that some services should never be considered as just part of basic services. Many claim situations against design firms and even against contractors occur because of both the differences and the overlap between market-driven and sustainable projects. Often clients want reduced initial costs and fast-track projects, and we are going to be seeing more of that as material prices rise and the demand for projects to be delivered on a timely basis increases. The goal is, for many of them, are not sustainability in construction and in operation, but rather pure cost and time limitations. A client that is used to working that way but now wants a green project can be one of the worst clients possible. A client that wants a sustainable project must understand what third-party certification can do to a project in terms of time and cost. If that client just wants a marketing advantage, the green seal of approval with the leaves on it or some other system of advertising and increased value of the building, you need to know that, since that kind of an attitude could significantly affect your professional liability exposure and your reputation. Some clients want reduced energy and water costs and are willing to blame anyone involved in design and construction if anticipated or simulated energy costs are exceeded. And life cycle costs continue to be a difficult concept for many clients to understand. So you have to understand the competition and client demands, and you have to be able to educate a client appropriately. Now let's talk about the E204, the Sustainable Project Exhibit. We won't talk about the many resources we have developed to assist firms in managing their risk on projects emphasizing sustainability, in part because you can obtain that information from our website, and in part because much of our advice has been incorporated into the standard sustainability contractual information released by the AIA. Schinner has been an advisor to the AIA Contract Documents Program since 1963. And we help the AIA identify the professional liability exposures, and we develop model language and procedures which have been incorporated into AIA documents, including the relatively new E204. Risk can be minimized by using the AIA E204 Sustainable Project Exhibit to define the role of the participants and to incorporate the exhibit as part of the design and construction contracts. Over the years, the AIA addressed green design in three different ways. The D503, which in its first edition had both an explanation of exposures and model language, which, by the way, incorporated much of what we had developed to assist firms in managing their risks, later became more of a guidance document because special versions of B101 and other AIA documents were introduced. These sustainable project versions carried the model language from the first D503, so that document really became an advisory publication. It still has great value to firms. And now those sustainable project versions have been dropped, and a new exhibit created that would be signed by the owner and the architect and incorporated into all design and construction agreements. The exhibit covers the scope required of each of the three major contracting parties, the architect, the contractor, and the owner. It provides a common understanding of the components of the project, where there is an emphasis on sustainable design, construction, and operation. These are the items that it addresses. This slide lists the major additions to the architect's scope. The architect is required to conduct a workshop with the relevant parties during which participants will review and discuss potential sustainability certifications, establish the sustainable objective, discuss potential sustainable measures, examine strategies for implementation of the sustainable measures, and discuss the potential impact of the sustainable measures on the project schedule and the owner's program and the owner's budget for the cost of the work. Following the sustainability workshop, the architect prepares a sustainability plan based on the sustainability objectives and targeted sustainable measures. The architect then prepares schematic design, design development documents, and contract documents that incorporate the sustainable measures identified in the sustainability plan as appropriate. And during the construction phase, the architect's services include attention to how sustainable measures that were defined are being constructed and achieved, include review of proposed changes in the work and their potential impact on the sustainable measures and the sustainable objectives. And the architect forwards to the owner all the documentation collected regarding the sustainability documentation required for a certifying authority. And finally, the architect registers the project with the certifying authority and gathers all of the required submittal information and gets it properly submitted. That's a lot of work, and it's work that the architect needs to be paid for. The contractor also has a role, and the contractor performs those sustainable measures identified as the responsibility of the contractor in the sustainability plan. For instance, the contractor must include with any request for a substitution a written representation identifying any potential effect the substitution might have on the project's achievement of a sustainable measure or the sustainable objective. The contractor is responsible for preparing and completing the sustainability documentation required from the contractor by the contract documents, including any sustainability documentation required to be submitted after substantial completion. The contractor makes available to each proposed subcontractor prior to the execution of the subcontractor agreements copies of the sustainability plan. The contractor's scope continues through substantial and final completion, including the time that it takes for the certifying authority to certify the project. The owner's scope is also included. Based on the owner's approval of the sustainability plan and any approved changes to the sustainability plan, the owner must perform those sustainable measures identified as the responsibility of the owner or as otherwise required by the contract documents. The owner requires that each of the contractors and consultants perform the contractors or consultant services in accordance with the sustainability plan. So the owner has a continuing responsibility. The owner must comply with the requirements of the certifying authority as they relate to the ownership, operation, and maintenance of the project, both during construction and after completion of the project. And the owner must provide the services of a commissioning agent who shall be responsible for commissioning for the commissioning of the project, or the owner may engage the architect to provide the commissioning services as an additional service. The final point of the slide is that the sustainability plan is a contract document. It requires all project participants to comply with the requirements that are assigned to them. It must be attached to each contract. Now, let's conclude with the sustainability part with some basic reminders. Here are 10 practice points. Firms need to stay up to date with green legislation and changes in the standards or codes and jurisdictions where a specific project is located. Now, codes used to change more rapidly to deal with sustainability. It's more settled now, but there are changes that take place and you have to be aware of them. The standard of care related to sustainability continues to evolve. So you have to know the current standard of care for your profession. You know, does a standard of care for a specific project type include green design services? It may. And of course, you need to understand your professional society's code of ethics. You know, if a dispute arises, the code will be used to establish a professional duty. And whether you're an engineer or an architect, the codes of ethics address sustainability. And you know that there are mergers and changes in third-party certification programs. So be familiar with the major green rating systems as they change. And do not mislead clients. You must be careful that your advertising and marketing is not overselling your experience with green design. It is critical that you understand your green design, your client's green expectations early in a process. You have to know whether the client wants an environmentally sensitive project, a low energy use project, or simply a certified project. If expectations are high or unattainable, explain the green process and discuss realistic outcomes. Some owners understand the process, many owners still do not. If a client expects specific results, you know, absolute results, guaranteed results, or 100% perfection in design, carefully consider whether to accept that project. It's not a bad idea to walk away. Be realistic in assessing your firm's capabilities. Examine whether contracts require extensive or untested green design services. If you do not plan to offer these specific green design services, or maybe are incapable of state-of-the-art design requirements included by a client, eliminate those provisions. And never promise warrant or guarantee specific design results, such as a specific certification or third-party approval or waste reduction or decreased energy use or anything else over which you have no control. That was a major cause of claims in the first wave, and we still see claims. Make sure you follow documentation guidelines in your quality assurance quality control plan carefully so that communications with the client about green design services and options and the client's agreement to require the contractor to perform to meet sustainability objectives are recorded properly. And as we have suggested for years, use informed consent forms when offering green design services, especially with unproven or experimental products or systems. Okay, and with that, let's move on to condo design risks. One way to look at risk is to determine if a firm is collecting enough in fees to pay both for the services provided and the risks assumed. And that is how insurance can look at risk. Insurers can look at risk. Can we collect enough in premiums to be able to pay the claims as well as the other costs of running an insurance program? Here is what we know, and I'm sure other insurers who still insure firms that design condos have basically the same statistics. We asked firms to report what percentage of their buildings come from what type of projects. And we know what percentage of our claims costs go to what type of projects. And that ratio for firms designing condos is astounding. A ratio of 1-to-1 indicates that the fee is appropriate for that risk. We are paying out in claims the same percentage that the reported buildings constitute. But if you get above that, the fees you're collecting may not be appropriate for the project risks. And that happens with various types of projects, especially with multifamily projects, housing projects of any type for that matter. And the ratio of claims costs to fees for condo projects was greater than 4-to-1 the last time we looked at it. And I'm sure it hasn't changed since that. It's been a relatively stable number, and it shows that the amount that we pay out of all the claims we pay related to condos is significantly higher than the percentage of billings that our clients report to us. So there are three options. Firms could charge more and bring it in line with their billings, or we should charge more, and that's difficult to do because we charge a lot for firms that do a lot of condos now. Or firms need to find some way of limiting claims against them. So let's talk about what drives claims. And the next two slides show some of the drivers of claims related to condos. There are some basic issues that arise such as these. Contract considerations. What specific risk is the client burdening you with? Condo developers often have contracts that are terrible for design professionals. The multiplication of design and construction problems results in a lot of claims. Realize that a problem in one condo unit is likely to be repeated in many others, such that it's not easier or inexpensive to solve a problem either during construction or after the project is put in place and into the stream of commerce. So the multiplication of these problems, especially in a high-rise condo, can result in tremendous claims. FHA amendments and ADA housing regulations have become a significant source of claims. And again, if one unit has, for instance, an ADA problem, chances are the problem occurs throughout the structure. And as people look for ADA violations in a condo, they may be able to find many of them, and that may be a costly remedial effort. And inappropriate value engineering. You probably know that there's a possibility of value engineering during design, getting a contractor on board early. Often that's basically a constructability review, and that makes a lot of sense. And that can solve a lot of problems early on because the designer can work with the contractor to design a project in a way that the contractor can build it efficiently and properly. But once the project starts, any change to improve the project, which usually means to cheapen the project, could result in problems. They have a quite higher likelihood of creating a problem than a design change before construction starts. But there are some other real triggers to claims. Firms that design condos for developers who want to preserve their reputations, who are well-funded, who are sophisticated, have some of the problems from the last slide, but less so from these four factors. Good developers know that condos are not rushed projects, that waterproofing and other specialty consultants are needed on that type of a project, and that minor problems need to be solved quickly to avoid major disputes later on. Too often, however, design firms work for bad clients and suffer because of it. And of course, these other factors, the fact that often a condo unit purchaser is investing a significant amount of their savings into a condo means that they not only have a financial interest in it, they have an emotional interest. This is something that they've invested in, that they're probably living in. Condo boards or HOAs often have limited budgets and often limited experience and may not understand how to maintain a building, the common spaces, or how to involve professionals to solve problems early on. And of course, there's aggressive law firms that just look for litigation, and condos provide them with a good source of income. One of the issues is class action litigation. Condo litigation really can provide plaintiff's attorney with a strong source of income from, HOA suits or class action lawsuits. Here are four factors that lead to litigation routinely. Condo marketing campaigns, especially by limited life developers, often create unrealistic expectations. And purchasers invest a lot of money based on those expectations. Defects are repeated in each unit, resulting in multiple plaintiffs, and that means they can share litigation costs. So not only is it they occur throughout the project, but each party harmed has a stake in solving the problems and a stake in the litigation. Condo buyers are frequently first-time buyers and lack knowledge or money for maintenance. And the maintenance of units or common areas can create problems that lead to claims. So there may not be a problem initially, but lack of maintenance may cause a problem to develop. And if that problem can be traced back to the original design, there's major litigation possible. And plaintiff's attorney do target condo projects, especially those that are nearing the statute of repose. That would normally cut off all claims. So many HOAs and many attorneys will go into a condo that they know was built so many years before, do a survey of the unit owners, talk with the condo board, and develop a list of complaints that could be filed before the statute of repose cuts off all claims related to that project. In fact, law firms, this is a cottage business. A lot of law firms can simply go online, and buy a package of litigation information that they can use. And it tells them how to do a survey, how to interview people, how to acknowledge what kind of problems exist, and they use that kind of package of information to sell their services to unit owners and the condo board. So it can be a prosperous way for lawyers to get their income. They're not really creating the problems, but they're helping to identify the problems and often to magnify the problems in a way that they can then go out and have litigation that may force parties to settle to solve the problems rather than to go through the expense of litigation. Now, there are some self-protective services, so how do you minimize your exposure? Here are some examples. I mean, there are other things, legislation that addresses the problems through things like meet and confer or mediated settlements or first right to respond. It can be helpful, but you should consider these. Provide additional services. Prepare that maintenance manual as part of your services so that there's evidence that the parties know what should be required of them to keep their units or the entire condo running properly. And some condo design firms offer their services to the HOA or condo board, so they try to have a continuing relationship with the project so that they're not seen as that distant enemy, but really someone who can help solve a problem. Also, negotiate with your client, about things like the retention of a full-time water penetration specialist. Again, knowledgeable developers will do that. Talk about the establishment of a contingency fund for testing, repairs, and maintenance early on. And try to get your client to include a mandatory mediation clause and maintenance requirements in the HOA bylaws. That varies state to state on what can be done. So you really need to look at how things are run in your states, how developers work to transfer the interest to the condo board and to the unit owners, and see where you might fit in to really head off many of those future claims. And as I said earlier, our ushered.com/School of Risk Management has more information on condo risks and protections. I want to remind you about your single greatest risk. It is, of course, developers. When you're working with developers, you really have to look at their basis in the community. You might be sued by an aggressive plaintiff's attorney representing unit owners and the condo board, but the cause of the exposure often is your client. So don't provide your services to a client that's a paper company with few assets and no interest in being around after the units are sold. These condo developers that are set up as LLCs and maybe a group of investors that think this is an easy payback. They have a limited life. They have limited assets. Often stated assets are minor, and therefore they have limited liability. But you, as a professional, can't limit your liability to third parties. You may have limited assets within your firm and limited assets within your insurance coverage, but you don't have a limited life. You're there to protect public health, safety, and welfare. You can't simply come up with a company that's going to design this condo and then shut it down immediately like a developer can. You're going to be around, and therefore you could be the target of that claim before the statute of repose runs out. Now, think about this when you are creating your contract for services. Too often design firms or contracted for minimum services during construction. That's a warning sign that litigation is on the horizon. This project, for instance, is one where it had major water intrusion problems. And it had major water intrusion problems because of the way those open areas were created, the balconies were created. Whether that was a design problem or a construction problem wasn't determined right away. And the architect that designed this had no ability to be there on the site and look at how things were operating. So all the units that faced west and that got major rain hitting them ended up with major water intrusion problems. That might have been headed off had the architect had a greater role during the construction phase of the project. So let's talk about some practice suggestions for condos. And whether or not these are the only ways to protect yourself or not, we know these can be effective. There are many other ways through legislation that you might be protected at the state level. But what we have seen most recently is that many states do not really want to protect architects in this kind of a situation. They may protect contractors through some sort of a first response law, and that's often because contractors have a much greater influence at the state legislative level. But often architects or engineers who are involved in condos may benefit from that, but are not the target beneficiaries. So think about these things. Expand your scope of services. Do not do only what is necessary for a building permit. Do not just do a design and turn it over without being involved during the construction phase. Be aware of your fee. Obtain an adequate fee. Remember, one of the reasons that insurers find condos projects so dangerous is that the ratio of billings compared to the ratio of claims is so unrealistic. That's true with your risk. Collect enough money not only to perform your services, but to take into account that you might have a greater risk on a condo project. You want an adequate scope of service. You want the time to be able to perform your services. You want a client who understands those services. You want to be able to test those services, whether it's the facade for water intrusion or an HVAC system, or even sound throughout the building. But you need an adequate fee and adequate consultant fees to be able to do that. We also suggest that you work with a developer that understands the value of construction phase services, and that will use other consultants, such as the water intrusion and sound experts, to help make the condo a project that people won't be disappointed in. Again, there's a major difference between designing apartments that are often designed with protecting the apartment owner, but not caring too much about tenants in apartments, because if they have a problem, they'll leave. But with condos, it really gets reversed. You really need to do something to make sure those condo owners are protected, understand that they have real value in what they're purchasing. Know your jurisdiction. And if you're practicing many jurisdictions, the laws related to your liability and to how condos are set up, how condos are sold, and how condos are operated may be significantly different. There are no standard sets of legislation at the state level to govern condos. They can vary a great deal, and in some states they are extremely protective of the consumer, the condo owner. In other states, they may be protective of the developer. It often depends on what state you're looking at. but you need to know the specific law of the jurisdiction. You do not want to end up in a situation where everyone's protected but you. So you become the deep pocket for any claims that may come out of that condo, because again, developers or even contractors may have protections. Design a project for maintenance. Again, apartments are usually designed to be maintained because somebody's going to have a continuing interest in that and wants to minimize the long-term costs. But developers often look at condos as, a way to pass maintenance costs to the unit owners in the condo board. And that's a dangerous attitude in a developer that you're working with. And think about this, we put out a lot of contract language. The AIA will have contract language in that sustainable, in their documents, and they have information on working with condos and how you adapt a owner-architect agreement to working on housing projects. But contract language really can't protect you. You sign a contract with the developer. You don't sign a contract with the condo owners. And there's been efforts over the past to have things like mediation by covenant built into condo purchase agreements. None of that seems to work very well. So, don't think that you understand the law. Don't think that you should assume that provisions such as limitations of liability are the kind of silver bullets that will protect you in the future. Often the kind of language that you might think will protect you really are landmines. They really help get somebody else off the hook, maybe an insurer, but somebody else off the hook, but keep you as a deep pocket. So be very careful about that. Now, I wanted to make sure we had time to talk about the School of Risk Management, because I think this is very important to you as you're looking at condo risk or sustainability risks. The School of Risk Management is what we rebranded our risk management part of our Schneider website. You will need to sign up for it. If you haven't already established an account, do so. Once you register, and you just press that need assistance, and it will tell you how to set up an account on the website. Once you do that, you can look at claim studies, benchmarking information. There's information about condo claims on there. You can look at management advisories, which are information documents spread throughout this on managing your project and running your firm, including ones on language you can use in your contract, including ones on what kind of legislation you might be able to support at the state level on condos, for instance. There's plenty of articles on green design on the website as well. There's contract language and commentaries, including information on both green design and condos that you can look at and see if that makes sense in your contract, or you can work with your local legal advisor to see if it works in your jurisdiction. And we even have past webinars on our website. So if you're looking for CEUs, and most of these are health, safety, welfare CEUs, you can take them through our website. We have a service provided through Red Vector that will, where you can go. There's various sets of programs that you can access and get continuing education credits for them by just taking a simple test after you listen to the webinars. So with that, I will look at whatever questions we